Sure, we've all heard the commotion about the loneliness epidemic going on since COVID hit. The UK and Japan appointed loneliness ministers, and the World Health Organization declared loneliness a pressing public health concern.
Yeah, President Biden's Surgeon General even issued a warning about an epidemic of loneliness. It seemed to be this really big, like, sweeping public sentiment in the years following COVID.
So many people are complaining of feeling lonely, feeling alone, feeling isolated.
It turns out that being alone is not good for us. And we saw, during the pandemic, there was a lot of isolation.
There's a loneliness epidemic in this country, in spite of everybody being on their phones all the time.
Well, according to a study published last month, this whole epidemic might have been overblown. It says a close look at the data indicates that loneliness may not be any worse now than it's been for much of history.
And these findings are especially timely because, believe it or not, we are actually coming up on the 5-year anniversary of COVID, which is crazy. I mean, the first case in the US was January 20th, 2020, and then COVID was officially declared a global health emergency more than a month later on March 11th.
So 5 years ago this time, we were all wondering, will this become a big thing? And unfortunately, we all know how that ended up. But I just can't believe that was half a decade ago.
No, that's crazy. And it's kind of even crazier that it's still around. So the biggest headline we've heard about COVID recently was that there was an outbreak from the SNL 50th anniversary. So Martin Short and Maya Rudolph are confirmed to have caught it.
You want to know what it takes to make a show like this last for 50 years?
And we're sure that you are all sick and tired of hearing about COVID.
But COVID fatigue really hit like 2 years ago. So I think a lot of us have been tuning it out for quite a while, but we think there's some important things that you need to know now. So today we're doing a COVID State of the Union.
So on Trump's first day back in office, he signed an executive order mandating that all federal agencies order their employees back into the office full time. The administration then released a more detailed directive to end all remote work arrangements for federal workers.
And this order was met with dismay from federal employees. Like I read an article interviewing a disabled veteran who's worked for the government for 22 years, who now has to go back to the office full time.
And it's an interesting choice by the Trump administration to require this because reports by the previous administration actually found that hybrid work was the best for productivity, performance, retention, and even cost.
Well, where's Elon then? Because that doesn't sound very efficient. But 55% of workers whose jobs can be done remotely have a hybrid setup, and 32% of workers work fully remotely. And apparently half of workers say they would leave their jobs if they couldn't work remotely anymore. So that's relatable.
That's very relatable. And I guess through COVID, there have been so many advancements to work from home. Like we were working at 60 Minutes when everything hit, and it seemed kind of impossible to be journalists and work fully remote. But then like all of a sudden, screenings were happening over Zoom, and we were all using like new software to share footage and edit pieces together.
So it only felt right to do this story remotely too. There are some other unexpected silver linings of COVID, like tipping culture has gone up, especially for delivery drivers. It's now normal to tip 20% because of the risks that were associated with delivery during COVID. And that trend has just kind of stayed.
Yeah, the hospitality and travel industries have just changed so much over the years. Like digital customer service and like online portals have improved so much now than if you think about like 5 years ago, because they're basically essential for most businesses now.
To say the pandemic was politicized is an understatement. Nearly 3/4 of US adults say the pandemic did more to drive the country apart than bring it together. And it's ironic that we can all agree on that.
Yeah, COVID has really exacerbated divisions, maybe because like the stakes of it all were just so high, people couldn't like really agree on anything. Even now, 60% of Democrats worry that we're not taking COVID seriously enough compared to 20% of Republicans.
COVID also drove mistrust in public institutions. So 80% of Republicans say the news media exaggerated the risks, but only 20% of Democrats say that.
And approval ratings of both Trump and Biden kind of suffered during the pandemic. They were around 40%, which is interesting because they had very different approaches.
Okay, why do you keep calling this the Chinese virus? As a lot of people say it's racist.
It's not racist at all. No, not at all. It comes from China.
So please get vaccinated now. It works. It's free. And it's never been easier. And it's never been more important.
Well, bad news for women. That's one of my least favorite phrases to say. New NIH research shows that women have a higher risk of developing long COVID because estrogen might play a role. Doctors aren't exactly sure how estrogen impacts the immune system, but older women who have decreased amounts of estrogen are the most at risk of long COVID.
But men apparently have it rough too. So according to the same study, men with long COVID are more likely to experience sexual dysfunction. Yikes. And for context, long COVID is when symptoms are in the body for at least 3 months. And according to the CDC, 8% of US adults reported having long COVID, and 3.5% say that they currently have it.
It's crazy that you don't have to worry about this at all since you've never had it. Mabel, how does it feel to be a Novid?
It feels pretty good. Thanks for asking, Ren. I tested, and I wasn't one of those people who never tested. I tested every single time I was slightly sick and never got a positive. But of course, every time I tell people I never got COVID, they're always like, well, you probably got it, and we're asymptomatic.
And that is possible because 20% of cases, according to doctors, are asymptomatic. But then there's also another theory that maybe you just have these superior COVID fighting genetics.
Well, it makes sense only because neither my brother nor I have ever gotten it, so maybe it is a genetic thing.
Well, one theory is that you have an overactive immune response in your nose, since that's where the virus starts multiplying.
Oh, okay, that's cool.
Another theory is the gene HLA is more active in you because that's what alerts the immune cells that there's invading microbes.
I love how you are nerding out on Novid on behalf of me. It's very good. Good friend points.
Well, the last theory is that maybe your T cells, which is the type of white blood cells that attack foreign invaders, are just extremely talented.
It could be any one of these things. All we know is that I've definitely been exposed because obviously we're running around New York all the time. And there's the infamous incident. Shall we tell them, Ren?
Yes, I suppose. So literally the week before Newsgirls was set to launch, Mabel and I were sitting next to each other, inches away, sharing a computer, doing
literally at your apartment,
doing our first interview ever for the show.
I was telling all my clients, get on Threads.
The next day, I tested positive for COVID.
I was so scared. I remember getting that text from you. It was such a crazy week. Like you said, it was our first episode. I was also a bridesmaid for one of my best friend's weddings, and I was going to fly out a couple days later. So it was chaos in the Newsgirls world, but I didn't get it. So Novid is real. We're going to get into where are we now. So according to infectious disease experts, COVID has gotten milder. So we haven't even seen a super variant since 2021.
Yeah, when I had it a couple months ago, it truly just felt like a mild cold or something. So it makes sense that hospitalizations are 11 times fewer now than they were during peak COVID, and severe symptoms like loss of smell and taste are way less common.
Yeah, and apparently it is still prevalent. Experts can trace the disease in wastewater, and they've seen dozens of sub-variants kind of pop up throughout the years, but like we said, COVID in general is more mild now, and there are a lot of theories as to why. So one is obviously that most people have been vaccinated and infected so many times that their bodies have a really strong immune memory of the virus, and they can fight off the infection very quickly.
And viruses often, not always, but often get milder with time because it's advantageous for the virus's survival. I mean, if they make people so sick that they can't go out and mingle with others, or if they kill their human host, that's bad because then they won't continue to spread to other people.
And then lastly, medical experts have studied other coronaviruses throughout history, and they've apparently seen this trend of them becoming milder until they're kind of similar to the cold. So maybe there is some kind of commonality between all coronaviruses and how they settle over time.
Well, no matter the reason, just thank goodness it's milder than it was. And this is shocking, only 4% of Americans wear masks now.
And apparently fewer than half of US adults said that they plan to get the updated COVID vaccine, which the FDA approved in August.
That's not the most comforting development because it seems COVID vaccine skepticism ushered in a newfound wave of general vaccine skepticism. Support for policies requiring vaccines in public schools have fallen 12%, and that's largely driven by Republicans. And that could help contextualize the current measles outbreak right now in Texas that's infected 100 people and 80 of them being kids.
Well, that was kind of a crazy COVID retrospective. So much about the world has just changed forever. And if we've learned anything as a society, it's hopefully to really take public health and the spread of diseases seriously.
And that may be put to the test sooner than any of us would like with this bird flu on the rise. As of last week, it's now endemic in cows, and multiple new variants were detected in dairy cows.
Bird flu also has a 50% death rate in humans, and last month, cattle reportedly got the virus a second time, which is very worrisome because people can potentially just keep getting it and spreading it.
Yeah, also if you don't build any immunity to it after having it. I mean, luckily there haven't been any reports of human to human spread so far, but experts say the outbreak is unlikely to end without some kind of intervention. Even one of the leaders of Trump's Operation Warp Speed, which we all remember was his COVID response team, wrote a New York Times op-ed saying he's really concerned about this bird flu.
So we are curious and anxious to see whether Trump can handle it this time around. He just purged a ton of experts at federal agencies, including workers who respond to specifically highly pathogenic avian influenza outbreak at the CDC and Department of Agriculture.
And last week, HHS Secretary RFK halted the CDC's seasonal flu vaccination campaigns, and the US has also cut communication with the WHO on influenza data.